We're keeping an eye on energy-related stocks, notably liquid natural gas names. They're higher following the EU reaching a trade deal with the U.S. The European Union will buy $750 billion worth of American energy. That's over the next 3 years. At least that is what they've said. Joining us now to discuss is RBC Capital Markets Global Head of Commodity Strategy, Helima Croft. So, Helima, it's $250 billion a year in energy purchases, at least as outlined. And what right now they buy about 77 billion euros worth of energy products. So,
from the United States, yes.
Is that realistic then to expect that that kind of increase will be able to take place?
I mean, if you think about the numbers, I mean, this is a hugely ambitious deal. I mean, as you mentioned, they take about 77 billion currently from the United States. Their total, energy import bill is about 375 euros. If this deal were to be realized, we'd be talking about the United States providing the lion's share of European energy imports. And we don't know the details right now in terms of what the composition of this deal is, how much is LNG, how much is, crude, how much is simply energy investment in terms of, infrastructure, how much is nuclear. So we don't know the details. But I think we can assume that a large portion of this will be increased U.S. LNG exports to Europe. There is a significant build out of U.S. LNG export capacity that is coming on in the next couple of years. Those volumes are largely expected to go to Europe, but not entirely to Europe. So are we going to be pulling volumes that were going to be going to Asia now over to Europe? Who are we going to be backing out? Again, hugely ambitious. Some of the, LNG numbers, we certainly are expecting U.S. growth into Europe, but to get to this huge headline number, that would be incredibly ambitious at this stage.
Yeah. Now, much of that LNG designed to replace the reliance the EU has on Russian LNG.
Yes.
I did note during this, von der Leyen said that we still have too much Russian LNG coming through the back door. Is there a lot?
Yes.
Do we know how to measure it? Do we know what the numbers really look like?
No, if you think about the first quarter of 2025, the U.S. was the largest supplier of LNG into Europe, but Russia was the second largest. They were getting about 17% of their LNG imports from Russia. They were higher than Qatari imports. And so they are aiming to try to back out all Russian gas imports into Europe by 2027. So we are talking about, as part of this deal, the U.S. taking that Russian market share, which I think is really important because if you just heard in the previous block, we talked about President Trump putting more pressure on Vladimir Putin to try to make a deal to end this war in Ukraine, shortening the timeline before we put new tariffs on countries taking Russian products. The question is, if you are Vladimir Putin, are you going to look to do a deal to end this war if you don't get your market share back for your most valuable product? Like Vladimir Putin, as part of any agreement to end this war, is going to want to get his market back for his energy export. So how do you reconcile these two deals?
Oh, that's a really good point there. In terms of just the overall capacity for the U.S., you mentioned more coming online that's expected for the U.S. to be able to service LNG. Is it enough, though, given the contours that we've seen of this deal and against this backdrop of data center demand and other demand elements here in the U.S.?
I mean, certainly, again, we're talking about a potentially 70% increase in U.S. capacity for LNG exports with these big projects, Port Arthur, Golden Pass. So in the near term, there does seem to be capacity to really surge U.S. exports of LNG. I think the question is, as we get past sort of 2030, as we talk about this really big data center build out that we're talking about the U.S. and the tremendous energy needs that are going to be required for this build out, can you be talking about surging LNG exports globally when you're going to need more volumes of gas domestically? So I think that's going to be a post-2030 question, but I think it's going to become critically important as we think about the AI build-out.
So if we're overpromising on that supply, Helima, wouldn't it make sense to argue that in the end, when push comes to shove, we're going to keep it for ourselves?
Well, again, certainly we have now, as we talk about near term, we're building out tremendous export capacity that is coming on even before this deal was announced. I mean, these projects have lead times. Like, we were planning for a big push on U.S. LNG exports. This is now just the market, again, that we are going to be pushing into, potentially drawing from Asia, which does lead to interesting questions about what is going to be in this trade deal potentially with China, because President Trump was expected to also push for China to take more volumes of U.S. energy. So again, like, how do we make it all work in terms of who we're supplying? But as we get to 2030, I think that's when it becomes an open question about where these volumes are going to go.
Yeah.
On rig count, Helima, can you solve this riddle for us about why rig count has been dropping so consistently? And does that portend a negative year-on-year production number for the U.S. this year?
I mean, we were expecting slower U.S. growth because of the price points that we were looking at in terms of energy. And there's an open question for the fourth quarter when it comes to crude, in terms of, are we potentially going to be oversupplied? Now, I was at the OPEC seminar in Vienna just a couple of weeks ago with Brian Sullivan, and I can tell you that you did have the OPEC oil ministers plus IOC CEOs saying that demand is still consistently strong for their products into Asia, but there has been a lot of debate about what the fourth quarter is going to look like for crude. And so there had been this view that we were going to be slowing this year and potentially slowing next year when it comes to U.S. production. So again, when we take this big discussion about like the 250 billion a year, when we talk about the crude side, how much more crude do we really have in terms of production growth?
Helima, going to leave it there for today. Always appreciate it. Thank you.